Section 6 of The Story of the Trapper by Agnes Christina Laut. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ted Linehart. Chapter 6. The French Trapper. To live hard and die hard, king in the wilderness and pauper in the town, lavish today and penniless tomorrow. Such was the life of the most picturesque figure in America's history. Take a map of America. Put your finger on any point between the Gulf of Mexico and Hudson Bay, or the Great Lakes and the Rockies. Ask who was the first man to blaze a trail into this wilderness, and wherever you may point, the answer is the same: the French trapper. Impoverished English noblemen of the 17th century took to freebooting, Spanish dons to piracy and search for gold. But for the young French noblesse, the way to fortune was by the fur trade. Freedom from restraint, quick wealth, lavish spending, and adventurous living all appealed to a class that hated the menial and slow industry of the farm. The only capital required for the fur trade was dauntless courage. Merchants were keen to supply money enough to stock canoes with provisions for trade in the wilderness. What would be equivalent to $5,000 of modern money was sufficient to stock 4 trappers with trade enough for 2 years. At the end of that time, the sponsors looked for returns in furs to the value of 800% on their capital. The original investment would be deducted and the enormous profit divided among the trappers and their outfitters. In the heyday of the fur trade, when 20 beaver skins were got for an axe, it was no unusual thing to see a trapper receive what would be equivalent to $3,000 of our money as his share of 2 years' trapping. But in the days when the French were only beginning to advance up the Missouri from Louisiana and across from Michilimackinac to the Mississippi, vastly larger fortunes were made. 2 partners have brought out as much as $200,000 worth of furs from the great game preserve between Lake Superior and the headwaters of the Missouri after 18 months' absence from St. Louis or from Montreal. The fur country was to the young French nobility what a treasure ship was to a pirate. In vain, France tried to keep her colonists on the land by forbidding trade without a license. Fines, the galleys for life, even death for repeated offense were the punishments held over the head of the illicit trader. The French trapper evaded all these by staying in the wilds till he amassed fortune enough to buy off punishment, or till he had lost taste for civilized life and remained in the wilderness, coureur des bois, voyageur, or leader of a band of half-wild retainers whom he ruled like a feudal baron, becoming a curious connecting link between the savagery of the New World and the noblesse of the Old. Duluth, of the Lakes region, La Salle, of the Mississippi, Le Moyne d'Iberville, ranging from Louisiana to Hudson Bay, La Mothe Cadillac in Michilimackinac, Detroit, and Louisiana, La Vérendrye exploring from Lake Superior to the Rockies, Radisson on Hudson Bay, all won their fame as explorers and discoverers in pursuit of the fur trade. 100 years before any English mind knew of the Missouri, French voyageurs had gone beyond the Yellowstone. Before the regions now called Minnesota, Dakota, and Wisconsin were known to New Englanders, the French were trapping about the headwaters of the Mississippi, and 2 centuries ago, a company of daring French hunters went to New Mexico to spy on Spanish trade. East of the Mississippi were 2 neighbors whom the French trappers shunned, the English colonists and the Iroquois. North of the St. Lawrence was a power that he shunned still more, the French governor, who had legal right to plunder the peltries of all who traded and trapped without license. But between St. Louis and Mackenzie River was a great unclaimed wilderness, whence came the best furs. Naturally, this became the hunting ground of the French trapper. There were 4 ways by which he entered his hunting ground. 1. sailing from Quebec to the mouth of the Mississippi, he ascended the river in pirogue or dugout, but this route was only possible for a man with means to pay for the ocean voyage. 2. From Detroit overland to the Illinois or Ohio, which he rafted down to the Mississippi, and then taking to canoe, turned north. 3. From Michilimackinac, which was always a grand rendezvous for the French and Indian hunters, to Green Bay on Lake Michigan, thence upstream to Fox River, overland to the Wisconsin, and downstream to the Mississippi. 4. Up the Ottawa through the Sioux to Lake Superior and westward to the hunting ground. Whichever way he went, his course was mainly upstream and north, hence the name Pays d'Anat vaguely designated the vast hunting ground that lay between the Missouri and the Mackenzie River. The French trapper was and is today as different from the English as the gamester is from the merchant. Of all the fortunes brought from the Missouri to St. Louis, or from the Pays d'Anat to Montreal, few escaped the gaming table and dram shop. Where the English trader saves his returns, Pierre lives high and plays high, and lords it about the fur post till he must pawn the gay clothing he has bought for means to exist to the opening of the next hunting season. It is now that he goes back to some birch tree marked by him during the preceding winter's hunt, peels the bark off in a great seamless rind, whittles out ribs for a canoe from cedar, ash, or pine, and shapes the green bark to the curve of a canoe by means of stakes and stones down each side. Lying on his back in the sun, spinning yarns of the great things he has done and will do, he lets the birch harden and dry to the proper form, when he fits the gunwales to the ragged edge, lines the inside of the keel with thin pine boards, and tars the seams where the bark is crinkled and split at the junction with the gunwale. It is in the idle summer season that he and his squaw, for the Pierre adapts, or rather adopts, himself to the native tribes by taking an Indian wife, design the wonderfully bizarre costumes in which the French trapper appears. The beaded toque for festive occasions, the gay moccasins, the buckskin suit fringed with horsehair and leather in lieu of the Indian scalp locks, the white caribou capote with horned headgear to deceive game on the hunter's approach, the powder case made of a buffalo horn, the bullet bag of a young otter skin, the muskrat or musquash cap, and great gauntlets coming to the elbow. None of these things does the English trader do. If he falls a victim to the temptations awaiting the man from the wilderness in the dram shop of the trading post, he takes good care not to spend his all on the spree. He does not affect the hunter's decoy dress, for the simple reason that he prefers to let the Indians do the hunting of the difficult game, while he attends to the trapping that is gain rather than game. For clothes, he is satisfied with cheap material from the shops. And if, like Pierre, the Englishman marries an Indian wife, he either promptly deserts her when he leaves the fur country for the trading post, or sends her to a convent to be educated up to his own level. With Pierre, the marriage means that he has cast off the last vestige of civilization and henceforth identifies himself with the life of the savage. After the British conquest of Canada and the American Declaration of Independence came a change in the status of the French trapper. Before, he had been lord of the wilderness without a rival. Now, powerful English companies poured their agents into his hunting grounds. Before, he had been a partner in the fur trade. Now, he must either be pushed out or enlist as servant to the newcomer. He who had once come to Montreal and St. Louis with a fortune of peltries on his rafts and canoes, now signed with the great English companies for a paltry $100, $200, and $300 a year. It was but natural in the new state of things that the French trapper, with all his knowledge of forest and stream, should become coureur de bois and voyager, while the Englishman remained the barterer. In the Mississippi Basin, the French trappers mainly enlisted with 4 companies. The Mackinac Company, radiating from Michilimackinac to the Mississippi, the American Company, up the Missouri, the Missouri Company, officered by St. Louis merchants, westward to the Rockies, and the Southwest Company, which was John Jacob Astor's amalgamation of the American and Mackinac. In Canada, the French sided with the Nor'westers and XYs, who had sprung up in opposition to the great English Hudson's Bay Company. Though he had become a burden carrier for his quondam enemies, the French trapper still saw life through the glamour of la gloire and noblesse, still lived hard and died game, still feasted today and starved tomorrow, gambled the clothes off his back and laughed at hardship, courted danger and trolled off one of his chansons brought over to America by ancestors of Normandy, uttered an oath in one breath at the whirlpool ahead, and in the next crossed himself reverently with a prayer to Saint Anne, the voyageur's saint, just before his canoe took the plunge. Your Spanish grandee of the Missouri Company, like Manuel Lisa of St. Louis, might sit in a counting-house or fur post adding up rows of figures, and your Scotch merchant chaffer with Indians over the value of a beaver skin. As for Pierre, give him a canoe sliding past wooded banks with the throb of the keel to the current and the whistle of wildfowl overhead, clear sky above with a feathering of wind clouds, clear sky below with a feathering of wind clouds, and the canoe between like a bird at poise. Sometimes a fair wind livens the pace, for the voyageurs hoist a blanket sail, and the canoe skims before the breeze like a seagull. Where the stream gathers force and whirls forward in sharp eddies and racing leaps, each voyager knows what to expect. No man asks questions. The bowman stands up with his eyes to the fore and steel-shod pole ready. Every eye is on that pole. Presently comes a roar, and the green banks begin to race. The canoe no longer glides. It vaults, springs, bounds, with a shiver of live waters under the keel and a buoyant rise to her prow that mounts the crest of each wave fast as wave pursues wave. A fanged rock thrusts up in midstream. One deft push of the pole. Each paddler takes the cue, and the canoe shoots past the danger straight as an arrow, righting herself to a new course by another lightning sweep of the pole and paddles. But the waters gather as if to throw themselves forward. The roar becomes a crash. As if moved by one mind, the paddlers brace back. The lightened bow lifts, a white dash of spray. She mounts as she plunges, and the voyagers are whirling downstream below a small waterfall. Not a word is spoken to indicate that it is anything unusual to sauter les rapides, as the voyagers say. The men are soaked. Now perhaps someone laughs, for Jean or Baptiste or the dandy of the crew got his moccasins wet when the canoe took water. They all settle forward. One paddler pauses to bail out water with his hat. Thus the lowest waterfalls are run without a portage. Coming back this way with canoes loaded to the waterline, there must be a disembarking. If the rapids be short, with water enough to carry the loaded canoe high above rocks that might graze the bark, all hands spring out in the water, but one man who remains to steady the craft, and the canoe is tracked upstream, hauled along by ropes. If the rapids be at all dangerous, each voyageur lands with pack on his back and pack straps across his forehead and runs along the shore. A long portage is measured by the number of pipes the voyager smokes, each lighting up, meaning a brief rest, and a portage of many pipes will be taken at a running gait on the hottest days without one word of complaint. 9 miles is the length of one famous portage opposite the Chaudière Falls on the Ottawa. In winter, the voyager becomes coureur de bois to his new masters. Then for 6 months endless reaches, white, snow-padded, silent, forest wreathed and bossed with snow. Nights in camp on a couch of pines or rolled in robes with a roaring fire to keep the wolves off, melting snow steaming to the heat, meat sputtering at the end of a skewered stick, sometimes to the marche donc of the driver, with crisp tinkling of dog bells and frosty air, a long journey overland by dog sled to the trading post, sometimes that blinding fury which sweeps over the Northland, turning earth and air to a white darkness, sometimes a belated traveler cowering under a snowdrift for warmth and wrapping his blanket about him to cross life's last divide. These things were the everyday life of the French trapper. At present, there is only one of the great fur companies remaining, the Hudson's Bay of Canada. In the United States, there are only two important centers of trade in furs which are not imported, St. Paul and St. Louis. For both the Hudson's Bay Company and the fur traders of the upper Missouri, the French trapper still works as his ancestors did for the great companies 100 years ago. The roadside tramp of today is a poor representative of Robin Hoods and Rob Roys, and the French trapper of shambling gait and baggy clothes seen at the fur posts of the North today is a poor type of the class who used to stalk through the baronial halls of Montreal's governor like a lord and set the rafters of Fort William's council chamber ringing and make the wine and the money and the brawls of St. Louis a byword. And yet, with all his degeneracy, the French trapper retains a something of his old traditions. A few years ago, I was on a Northern River steamer going to one of the Hudson's Bay trading posts. A brawl seemed to sound from the steerage passengers. What was the matter? Oh, said the captain, the French trappers going out north for the winter, drunk as usual. As he spoke, a voice struck up one of those chansons populaires, which have been sung by every generation of voyagers since Frenchmen came to America, à la Clairefontaine, a song which the French trappers' ancestors brought from Normandy hundreds of years ago, about the fickle lady and the faded roses and the vain regrets. Then, was it possible? These grizzled fellows, dressed in tinker's tatters, were singing, what? A song of the grand monarch, which has led armies to battle, but not a song which one would expect to hear in northern wilds. Malbrouck s'en va en guerre, mais quand reviendra-t-il? 3 foes assailed the trapper alone in the wilds. The first danger was from the wolf pack. The second was the Indian hostile, egged on by rival traders. This danger the French trapper minimized by identifying himself more completely with a savage than any other fur trader succeeded in doing. The third foe was the most perverse and persevering thief known outside the range of human criminals. Perhaps the day after the trapper had shot his first deer, he discovered fine footprints like a child's hand on the snow around a carcass. He recognizes the trail of otter or pecan or mink. It would be useless to bait a deadfall with meat when an unpolluted feast lies on the snow. The man takes one of his small traps and places it across the line of approach. This trap is buried beneath snow or brush. Every trace of man smell is obliterated. The fresh hide of a deer may be dragged across the snow. Pomatum or castoreum may be daubed on everything touched. He may even handle the trap with deer hide. Pecan travel in pairs. Besides, the dead deer will be likely to attract more than one forager, so the man sets a circle of traps round the carcass. The next morning he comes back with high hope. Very little of the deer remains. All the flesh-eaters of the forest, big and little, have been there. Why, then, is there no capture? One trap has been pulled up, sprung, and partly broken. Another carried a little distance off and dumped into a hollow. A third had caught a pecan, but the prisoner had been worried and torn to atoms. Another was tampered with from behind and exposed for very deviltry. Some have disappeared altogether. Among forest creatures, few are mean enough to kill when they have full stomachs, or to eat a trapped brother with untrapped meat a nose length away. The French trapper rumbles out some maledictions on la sacrée carcajou. Taking a piece of steel, like a cheese tester's instrument, he pokes grains of strychnine into the remaining meat. He might have saved himself the trouble. The next day he finds the poisoned meat mauled and spoiled so that no animal will touch it. There is nothing of the deer but picked bones. So the trapper tries a deadfall for the thief. Again, he might have spared himself the trouble. His next visit shows the deadfall torn from behind and robbed without danger to the thief. Several signs tell the trapper that the marauder is the carcajou or wolverine. All the stealing was done at night, and the wolverine is nocturnal. All the traps have been approached from behind. The wolverine will not cross man's track. The poison in the meat had been scented. Whether the wolverine knows poison, he is too wary to experiment on doubtful diet. The exposing of the traps tells of the curiosity which characterizes the wolverine. Other creatures would have had too much fear. The tracks run back to cover and not across country like the badgers or the foxes. Fearless, curious, gluttonous, wary, and suspicious, the mischief maker and the freebooter and the criminal of the animal world, a scavenger to save the Northland from pollution of carrion, and a scourge to destroy wounded, weaklings, and laggards, the wolverine has the nose of a fox, with long, uneven, tusk-like teeth that seem to be expressly made for tearing. The eyes are well set back, greenish, alert with almost human intelligence of the type that preys. Out of the fullness of his wrath, one trapper gave a perfect description of the wolverine. He didn't object, he said, to being outrun by a wolf or beaten by a respectable Indian, but to be outwitted by a little beast the size of a pig with the snout of a fox, the claws of a bear, and the fur of a porcupine's quills was more than he could stand. In the economy of nature, the wolverine seems to have but one design: destruction. Beaver dams 2 feet thick and frozen like rock yield to the ripping onslaught of its claws. He robs everything: the muskrats' haycock houses, the gopher burrows, the cached elk and buffalo calves under hiding of some shrub while the mothers go off to the watering place, the traps of his greatest foe, man, the cached provisions of the forest ranger, the graves of the dead, the very teepees and lodges and houses of Indian, half-breed, and white man. While the wolverine is averse to crossing man's track, he will follow it for days, like a shark behind a ship, for he knows as well as the man knows there will be food in the traps when the man is in his lodge, and food in the lodge when the man is at the traps. But the wolverine has 2 characteristics by which he may be snared: gluttony and curiosity. After the deer has disappeared, the trapper finds that the wolverine had been making his regular rounds of the traps as he has himself. It is then a question whether the man or the wolverine is to hold the hunting ground. A case is on record at Moose Factory, on James Bay, of an Indian hunter and his wife who were literally brought to the verge of starvation by a wolverine that nightly destroyed their traps. The contest ended by the starving Indians traveling 100 miles from the haunts of that bad devil, oh, he bad devil, Carcajou. Remembering the curiosity and gluttony of his enemy, the man sets out his strongest steel traps. He takes some strong-smelling meat, bacon or fish, and places it where the wolverine tracks run. Around this he sets a circle of his traps, tying them securely to poles and saplings and stakes. In all likelihood, he has waited his chance for a snowfall which will cover traces of the man-smell. Night passes. In the morning the man comes to his traps. The meat has been taken. All else is as before. Not a track marks the snow, but in midwinter, meat does not walk off by itself. The man warily feels for the hidden traps. Then he notices that one of the stakes has been pulled up and carried off. That is a sign. He prods the ground expectantly. It is as he thought. One trap is gone. It had caught the wolverine, but the cunning beast had pulled with all his strength, snapped the attached sapling, and escaped. A fox or beaver would have gnawed the imprisoned limb off. The wolverine picks the trap up in his teeth and hobbles as hard as 3 legs will carry him to the hiding of a bush, or better still, to the frozen surface of a river, hidden by high banks, with glare ice which will not reveal a trail. But on the river the man finds only a trap wrenched out of all semblance to its proper shape, with a spring opened to release the imprisoned leg. The wolverine had been caught and had gone to the river to study out the problem of unclinching the spring. One more device remains to the man. It is a gun trick. The loaded weapon is hidden full cock under leaves or brush. Directly opposite the barrel is the bait, attached by a concealed string to the trigger. The first pull will blow the thief's head off. The trap experience would have frightened any other animals a week's run from man's tracks. But the wolverine grows bolder, and the trapper knows he will find his snares robbed until Carcajou has been killed. Perhaps he has tried the gun trick before, to have the cord gnawed through and the bait stolen. A wolverine is not to be easily tricked, but its gluttony and curiosity bring it within man's reach. The man watches until he knows the part of the woods where the wolverine nightly gallops. He then procures a savory piece of meat heavy enough to balance a cocked trigger, not heavy enough to send it off. The gun is suspended from some dense evergreen, which will hide the weapon. The bait hangs from the trigger above the wolverine's reach. Then a curious game begins. One morning the trapper sees the wolverine tracks round and round the tree, as if determined to ferret out the mystery of the meat in mid-air. The next morning the tracks have come to a stand below the meat. If the wolverine could only get up to the bait, one whiff would tell him whether the man smell was there. He sits studying the puzzle till his mark is deep printed in the snow. The trapper smiles. He has only to wait. The rascal may become so bold in his predatory visits that the man may be tempted to chance a shot without waiting. But if the man waits, Nemesis hangs at the end of the cord. There comes a night when the wolverine's curiosity is as rampant as his gluttony. A quick clutch of the ripping claws and a blare of fire smoke blows the robber's head into space. The trapper will hold those hunting grounds. He has got rid of the most unwelcome visitor a solitary man ever had. But for the consolation of those whose sympathies are keener for the animal than the man, it may be said that in the majority of such contests, it is the wolverine and not the man that wins. End of section 6.